Imagine coming across someone so badly hurt and broken that you can't even recognize them. You might stop and ask yourself, how could anyone do this? Alan, carrying his own hidden pain, finds this person a girl left behind like garbage, barely clinging to life. She's an elf who's lost all hope, just waiting for God to end her suffering. But fate has something else in store for her. The story begins with a simple act of kindness. A man gently places a band-aid on a child's scraped knee, softly telling them it'll be okay. The child smiles and thanks him, their face lighting up with relief. The man kindly reminds the child to be more careful while playing, and with a grateful look, the child walks away. This man is the main character of our story, known as the Apothecary. He didn't come to treat anyone that day. Instead, he was searching for ingredients for his medicine. While passing by a market, a man from a pawn bazaar spotted him and called out. The apothecary was curious, but the man didn't explain much. He just kept saying, "You'll want to see this," and led him to a room something important was waiting there. The pawn shop owner admitted that someone close to him had left behind a huge burden, something he didn't know how to handle. His face showed just how worried he was. Then, he opened a door to a back room, and what the apothecary saw inside froze him in shock. His heart ached at the sight. He couldn't even speak. Lying there was a girl who looked more like a ghost than a person. Her body was broken, her spirit gone. She had long elf ears, each one pierced over and over. Her eyes were wide open but completely lifeless, like she had forgotten how to even blink. Scars, cuts, and bruises covered her from head to toe, telling the story of a long, painful life full of torture. The pawn shop owner, strangely calm, said the elf had been used until she couldn't take it anymore and then thrown away. The apothecary just stood there, stunned. That's when the man coldly pointed at the girl and said her body could still be useful, that it could be turned into powerful medicine. Then he told the apothecary to decide what to do with her. The apothecary walked over slowly, raising his hand. Magic flowed from his finger as he examined her. Her body was still in danger. Gangrene was spreading, and her fingers felt soft, like her body was giving up. During her torture, every single one of her fingernails had been torn out. Deep whip marks and cuts covered her skin, leaving behind terrible scars. Almost all her teeth had been pulled, except for a few at the back so she could still chew. Her left eye was gone, and the eyes she had left didn't even move. They looked completely empty. As the apothecary looked at her, trying to understand who could do something this cruel, he gently asked if she could hear him. Her ear twitched slightly, just enough to show she could still hear a little, even though her ears were full of holes. But her worst injuries weren't the ones on the outside. The apothecary could tell that her organs were badly damaged too. If he didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive. As he said this, his voice filled with sadness, the girl whispered something barely audible, "I want to go home." A single tear slid from her eye. That simple sentence hit him hard. Furious, the apothecary slammed his fist into the ground, thinking about how many times she must have begged for the same thing over and over only to be hurt again moments later. Her pleas must have been ignored, lost in the silence of her pain. But the pawn shop owner didn't seem to care. He kept talking about selling her, saying he'd let her go for less than the price of a cow or even a horse. "I don't want her dying in my shop," he said coldly. "If you're not going to take her, I'll find someone who will." The pawn shop owner kept trying to talk him into it, but finally, with a loud and determined shout, the man said he would take her. He asked the owner for a backpack so he could carry the girl on his back. The owner looked at him like he was crazy. "You're seriously going to walk across the mountain with a dying elf you don't even know?" he said, shocked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he gently placed a cloth over the girl's head and whispered to her softly, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'll hold you safely." The girl didn't move or say anything. She was completely silent and unresponsive, as if she had lost all sense of feeling. As he wrapped the cloth around her and got her dressed, she didn't flinch or resist. It was like she had been treated like an object for so long that she didn't even know how to react anymore. He lifted her carefully onto his back and began the long journey home. Along the way, he tried to speak to her, saying comforting things, though she never replied. At one point, he heard her quietly mumble something, but it was hard to make out. As he climbed higher, he realized the sun would be setting soon. He decided to stop at the top of the mountain to rest for the night. He leaned toward her gently and told her he was going to take the cloth off now. But even then, all she kept whispering was the same word, home. Alan set his bag down and told the girl he was going to make some food. "Just stay there," he said gently. She didn't respond. Her mind seemed far away, lost in the quiet wind. But as the warm, golden sunlight touched her face, Alan noticed something small yet meaningful. Her expression had softened a little since they left the city. Maybe it was because elves had always lived in forests, and being closer to nature gave her some peace. While preparing the food, Alan made sure it was soft and watery so she could eat it without struggling. With most of her teeth gone, that was the only way she could manage. He noticed her sniffing the air, confused but curious about the smell coming from beside her. Alan carefully scooped a little bit onto a spoon and gently brought it near her lips, telling her to eat slowly and gently. To his surprise, she opened her mouth and managed to chew it. It wasn't much, but it gave him hope. As he kept feeding her small spoonfuls, he asked softly if it tasted okay. She didn't speak, but after finishing the meal, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Alan wiped her face gently. But later that night, things took a turn for the worse. Her breathing grew heavier, and she groaned in pain. Sweat covered her skin. Alan did everything he could to figure out what was wrong. It looked like the infection in her arm was spreading fast, and if he didn't act soon, it could reach her organs and become deadly. Alan moved quickly, knowing he had to act fast. He started making a temporary medicine to help with her symptoms. He crushed together herbs that could fight infection and bring down her fever. He mixed elderflower and wild borage into a blend, then added a crushed magic stone, a bit of honey, and some salt so it would be easier for her to swallow. As he gently lifted her up, he whispered, "Don't give up, no matter how hard this is." He kept hoping that the medicine would help her pull through. After taking it, she lay back down, breathing a little easier. In a faint voice, she asked, "Where?" Alan knew right away what she meant. As he placed a cool cloth on her forehead, he softly stroked her hair and promised, "We'll go home soon." He comforted her, telling her it was okay to sleep now. Slowly, her eyes closed, and she finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. But Alan couldn't help thinking about the promise he made. Deep down, he felt guilty. He wanted to help her, but he also knew that her suffering might have been caused by people like him. It had only been 8 years since the war ended, when the 5 races finally started living in peace. He still believed those races were special, but now he couldn't ignore the pain they had left behind. But not everyone saw things the way Alan did. People like the pawn shop owner were everywhere looking down on other races and not even seeing them as real people. These kinds of beliefs were still alive, even after the war. As Alan sat with his thoughts, a nightmare suddenly took over his mind. Hands rose from the ground, grabbing at his legs. He stared at them with empty eyes. These were the faces and hands of those he had killed in the past, and now they haunted him in his dreams. He slowly opened his eyes and saw the morning sunlight pouring in. "Just a dream," he whispered to himself. Then he looked over at the girl. Her eyes were open wide, and for the first time, there was a tiny spark of life in them. Alan gave her a soft smile and told her gently that he was going to pick her up now. Even though he didn't have all the answers, didn't know exactly how to help, he still wanted to try. He knew that if he could care for her, maybe one day she'd be strong enough to return to where she came from. It wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and hard work, but he was willing. Alan clenched his fist, looked into her eyes, and spoke honestly. "You've been hurt so badly, not just your body, but your heart too. I don't know who you used to be, but I want to help you find her again." As he held her hand, Alan spoke gently. I want to give you a name, one that carries hope. He named her Ressur, saying it was a wish for her to heal and be born again. No matter what happens, I'll help you recover. That's a promise. Though her expression didn't change, Alan went on preparing a meal and spoke to her with kindness. Ressur just stared at him, silent and unsure, like she couldn't believe what was happening. After a long, tiring trip, they finally arrived at their destination. Alan looked at her warmly and said, "This is going to be your new home." Once inside, he gently removed the cloth from her head and helped her sit on the couch. In a quiet, shaky voice, filled with both sadness and a hint of hope, Ressur softly repeated, "Home." Alan smiled and told her that the first thing she needed was a bath. He noticed she barely had anything to wear her body thin and exposed, so he quickly stood up and said, "I'll be right back." He rushed down the hall and knocked on a nearby door. A soft voice from inside asked who it was. "It's Alan," he replied. "I really need your help." The door slowly opened, and a small, sweet-looking child peeked out. Her face lit up with joy. "It's the apothecary uncle," she cheered. But then, with a playful pout, the girl named Moan asked, "Did you bring the sweets you promised?" Alan apologized, but before he could say much, Moan's mother called out from behind, scolding her daughter for being rude. She walked over tall and graceful and apologized to Alan for Moan's behavior, saying he must be exhausted. Alan politely cut in and handed her a basket full of food. She seemed surprised Alan rarely asked for anything. But this time, he needed a favor. He asked if she had any clean clothes for Ressur. Understanding the situation, Moan's mother gave him some older clothes that were still in good shape and easy to fix if they ripped. Alan bowed his head, grateful for her kindness. Back at home, he started preparing a warm bath for Ressur. Steam curled out of the chimney as the tub filled with soothing hot water. Alan gently removed her torn, filthy clothes, keeping her body covered with a cloth so she wouldn't feel exposed or scared. But to his surprise, she didn't react at all. She just sat there, lifeless, her eyes empty and full of pain. As he helped her, his eyes landed on her back. Her pale, thin body was covered with scars, harsh, jagged lines running across her skin. They were the aftermath of long, repeated whippings, never properly treated. The damage had healed badly, leaving deep, permanent marks. The sight hit Alan hard, tearing at him from the inside. As Alan gently washed Ressur, his hands shook. The scars on her body weren't just physical, they felt like they were left behind with hatred. Around her neck, he saw deep marks shaped like fingers, signs that someone had tried to choke her with brutal force. Seeing this filled Alan with quiet fury. He couldn't understand how anyone could be that cruel. When he began unwrapping the bandage on her infected arm, he struggled to keep his emotions in check. But after taking a deep breath, he focused on treating her wounds, one step at a time. He knew that untreated injuries could become deadly, so he used herbal ointments to help her scars heal. On the deeper wounds, he carefully placed cloths soaked in a thick medicinal mixture to help speed up recovery. This process would need to be repeated every 3 days. Once he finished cleaning her wounds, he helped her stand so he could dress her properly. While going through the clothes, he found a woman's comb. He realized that Moan's mother must have guessed what Ressur needed and included it without saying a word. As Alan gently dressed her and ran the comb through her tangled hair, he caught a glimpse of the person she might have been: peaceful, graceful, and kind. He paused for a moment, letting out a quiet sigh, feeling the weight of what they'd just gone through. Then he remembered the food he had prepared earlier and how badly he needed to rest. As Alan helped her get dressed, he noticed she suddenly began trembling more than before, her face turning red with embarrassment. Concerned, he quickly asked if she had a fever or if something was hurting. But then he realized she probably just needed to use the bathroom. Without wasting a second, he picked her up and rushed out. It surprised him. She hadn't reacted at all when he undressed her earlier, yet now she was clearly embarrassed. There was something pure and dignified about that reaction. Later, as he gently fed her, Alan started to believe that her emotions were still alive somewhere deep inside. Maybe if she kept eating good food regularly, it could help her slowly open up. But that also meant he'd have to figure out a way to fix her missing teeth, something that would make eating much easier for her. Still, a bigger issue remained: the damage inside her body. If her condition didn't improve soon, he might be forced to consider amputation. He even thought about asking for help from a trusted doctor. After feeding her, Alan carried her to her room and laid her down carefully. Her eyelids drooped, and she fell asleep quickly, as if her body had finally allowed her to rest after all the pain she had endured. As she slept, Alan looked at her and silently hoped there was still a way to heal everything: the injuries deep inside, the scars, the infections, and all the hidden suffering. The only thing that could help now was a rare and powerful healing potion, one with the power to fully regenerate what was lost. While thinking about everything, Alan slowly closed his eyes, wondering if the elves really did have some kind of legendary healing potion. The next morning, he gave some beans to a crow trained to deliver letters and tied a note to its back. As the bird took off into the sky with a message, Alan turned to Rehabilitation and gently told her to stay safe while he worked in the field. Alan wasn't just a medicine maker, he also grew many of his own herbs. This helped a lot since his home was far from any big city. As he worked under the warm sun, a soft wind passed through the trees, filling the air with the scent of leaves and earth. Rehabilitation caught that smell, and it reminded her of something deep in her memory. Tears rolled down her cheeks without a sound. It was the smell of home. Alan noticed her crying quietly but didn't interrupt her thoughts. A little while later, Mon appeared, calling out Ojai-san as she opened the door, dressed casually and carrying a small bag. Alan smiled and greeted her, but Mon wasn't really there for him. She was curious about the mysterious girl he was caring for. She asked if she could talk to Rehabilitation, and Alan agreed, thinking it would be good for Rehabilitation to slowly reconnect with people. While Mon sat beside Rehabilitation, trying to start a conversation, Alan focused on something else, thinking more about the food and how to help with her missing teeth. Alan had made up his mind to create a set of dentures for Rehabilitation by using knowledge from old books and research. He focused on the idea of carving artificial teeth from boar tusks. While he was deep in thought, Mon suddenly called out to him. "Why doesn't Rehabilitation talk? I've been speaking to her, but she never answers." Alan paused for a moment, then replied gently, "Maybe she's still searching for a reason to use her voice again." Even though Mon was just a kid, those words sparked something in her. With a big smile, she ran off, only to return later calling loudly, "Alan, look!" When he turned around, he was surprised to see Rehabilitation dressed up with a paper crown on her head. She looked like a quiet princess, beautiful in a simple and soft way. Alan smiled warmly and told Mon, "You did a great job. She looks lovely." What Mon said next left him stunned. "So Rehabilitation is going to be your bride, right?" Alan quickly waved his hands, flustered, and replied, No, I'm just here to help her get better, that's all." Laughing and teasing, Mon skipped away happily. Alan quietly thought to himself that small, happy moments like these were probably helping Rehabilitation recover not just physically, but in her heart too. He went back to checking her condition, gently putting drops in her eyes, replacing the special healing cloth on her scars, and listening to her heartbeat, which still sometimes felt a little too weak. Alan had finally created a perfect set of fake teeth for Rehabilitation, carefully shaped to look just like the ones she had lost. After finishing the procedure, he told her to try them out. Smiling behind his mask, he said cheerfully, "Today, we're going to celebrate your brand new teeth." Not long after, a local farmer showed up at Alan's door, giving him a large cut of meat, much more than Alan had expected. Alan got to work cooking it. The meat sizzled in the pan, filling the air with a delicious smell. He had soaked it in fruit liquor to make it tender and cut it into small, easy-to-chew pieces. Alan took a bite-sized piece and gently offered it to Rehabilitation. As she bit into it, drool spilled from her mouth, and her ears twitched with excitement. Alan's smile widened as he gave her more, and she kept eating, unable to stop. Tears streamed down her face as she savored the taste. It was clear this meal meant everything to her. "Food really makes you happy, doesn't it, Rizzer?" Alan said softly as he continued feeding her. Since that moment, something in her had started to shift. Her senses were becoming more alive, a hopeful sign that maybe, just maybe, she would soon begin to express emotions, or even speak. Her hunger was also returning, a small but powerful step forward. Just as Alan cheerfully announced, "We're having bacon today," everything changed in an instant. Rizzer suddenly collapsed, coughing up blood and hitting the ground hard. Her face went pale, and she looked like she was about to die. Alan rushed to her side, panic flooding his mind as he tried to figure out what was wrong. He saw strange red marks spreading across her chest. Her body twitched uncontrollably, her breathing grew shallow, and her eyes were bloodshot. This wasn't just an illness, it was something far worse. Alan quickly realized she had been poisoned, likely with neurotoxin from an obsidian spider. These spiders were tiny but extremely deadly, often used in secret killings long ago. Watching her struggle in pain, Alan guessed this had something to do with her past. Maybe her former master had done this to her. "I'm not going to let her die like this," Alan shouted as he scrambled to make an emergency cure. He mixed up some ground charcoal, a known remedy to absorb toxins, and gently helped her drink it on her empty stomach. Then he lightly patted her back to help her spit it out. Moments later, Rizzer vomited up a strange, dark capsule. Alan picked it up and examined it closely. It wasn't just a normal pill, it looked like a shell, something that had been sitting inside her for a long time, slowly releasing poison until now. Alan spotted strange writing carved into the shell. It was ancient, filled with dark curse symbols meant to slowly destroy her from the inside, making her suffer and die painfully without anyone suspecting foul play. As he crushed the cursed object in his hand, a wave of fury washed over him. Whoever had done this wanted her gone in the cruelest way possible and made sure it couldn't be traced back to them. Not long after, Alan called Moan's mother to come help him check on Rizzer. Moan cried quietly, heartbroken that her friend had fallen so ill. Alan, now fully dressed for the journey, told them he had to go. He was heading out to collect venom from the creature that had originally produced the poison, so he could make a proper cure. Moan and her mother promised to stay by Rizzer's side. Alan warned them he might be gone for over 3 days. He left behind detailed instructions on how to care for her while he was away, especially when the poison's effects became stronger. His voice shook as he added something difficult. If things took a turn for the worse and she didn't survive before he came back, he wanted them to make sure she had a proper funeral. He said he wouldn't be able to handle it all on his own. Moan's mother gently took the list from him and noticed the deep pain in his expression. Wanting to ease the tension, she lightly tapped his arm with a smile and said, "Don't worry, it'll be okay." She promised to do her part and told him he had to focus on doing his, so Rizzer wouldn't have to suffer anymore. "She'll keep fighting to stay alive too. Leave it to us," Moan's mother said with confidence. As Alan got ready to leave, he leaned close to Rizzer and gently told her to hold on, he'd be back soon with the cure. But to create the antidote, he needed a few rare ingredients. First, the mandragora root, which looked a bit like ginseng. Then, special stones called mana quartz that could hold elemental power. And lastly, the hardest thing of all, a fresh sample of the spider's poison. To get that, he had to go straight into the spider's lair. He stashed his heavy bag nearby since it would slow him down during the fight. He paused for a moment, testing the strength of a longbow he hadn't used in years. It still felt strange in his hands. As he stepped into the dark, echoing cave, a small glow lit up from his fingertip to guide the way. Up ahead, he noticed tangled webs filled with trapped mice. Alan's eyes narrowed as he finally spotted the creature he'd come for, the obsidian spider. It was enormous, covered in shiny scales, with glowing eyes that looked straight through him. Alan loaded an arrow, drew the string tight, and aimed right at it. But just before he released the shot, a wave of memories stopped him. The same power he was about to call on, the one that could end the spider in an instant, was the same power he'd once used to take so many lives, back before he became a healer. His hands shook. The arrow flew, but it missed anything vital. The arrow barely scratched the spider's hard shell. Alan paused for a moment, reminding himself why he was there. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Even if his skills were a little rusty, he had to push through for Rezur's sake. Focusing again, he pulled back his bowstring and activated his special technique, Aruma. A magic spell lit up on the arrow's tip, crackling with electricity. The lightning-charged arrow shot forward, hitting the spider right between the eyes. He quickly followed it up with more precise shots, and the huge spider collapsed without putting up much of a fight. Alan approached the monster's body and carefully removed the venom gland. With a firm voice, he whispered, "Just hang in there, Rezur." Back home, he got to work right away, using every ingredient he had gathered to mix a cure. He filled a special syringe shaped like a tooth and softly apologized to her. "I'm sorry for making you wait. You're going to be okay now." Then, he gave her the antidote. That night, Alan noticed small but clear signs of recovery. Rezur was breathing more steadily than before. Watching over her closely, he felt the weight on his shoulders ease. He gently held her hand and said with a smile, "The worst is over. You're going to make it." The words were as much for her as they were to reassure himself. Rezur had lived her whole life surrounded by darkness, like tangled roots pulling her down and keeping her trapped. She often stared up, searching for a glimpse of light or someone who might save her. But after hoping for so long, she had gone numb, no longer expecting anything to change. Then, in a quiet moment, she saw a hand reaching out to her, calling her name. That hand seemed to grow larger, as if it could hold all of her pain. She noticed every little detail with surprising clarity. When she opened her eyes, she was shocked to realize that she could see again. Her voice came out faintly as she whispered, "Light." Alan was taken aback. He looked at her, unsure of what to say, until he saw her eyes fill with tears. Gently, he asked if she could see clearly, but she responded, "I can feel you're here." Her sight was still returning slowly, just the presence of light. Not full vision, but it was progress. Relieved, Alan smiled and supported her as he checked her condition. Her body was getting stronger. The red marks on her chest had faded, the fever was gone, and her pupils were finally reacting. The poison had been flushed out. As Alan quietly thought about which ingredients had helped the most, he suddenly noticed tears streaming down Rezur's face. Alan gently asked if she was in pain or if something felt wrong. But instead of answering that, she looked at him and said, "Is Rezur my real name?" He replied honestly, "Actually, I didn't know what your name was. I just gave you one. If you don't like it, you can tell me what to call you." She looked down, trying to remember, and whispered, "I don't remember anything." Alan realized then she had retrograde amnesia. All her memories were gone. But that wasn't the only issue. The next big challenge was finding the land of the elves. Their location was a secret, well hidden from outsiders, and nobody really knew the way. As he sat thinking about all this, she quietly said, "Thank you for everything you've done for me." Hearing that, Alan felt something shift in his heart. Maybe he had been too focused on the negatives. He looked at her and promised, "From now on, I'll make sure you fully recover." And with a soft, peaceful smile, Rezur accepted this new chapter of her life.